My ex-wife told me I would never amount to anything and left me for another man because he could afford fancier dinners. Years later, she showed up at my house with a suitcase after she found out my company made millions. My ex-wife left me on a Wednesday. She didn't wait until I got home from work. She packed while I was gone and left a note on the counter that said she couldn't do this anymore, that she was tired of struggling, that she needed someone who could actually provide. Her name is Kendra. We were married 4 years. I was 26. I worked at a print shop for $14 an hour, 6 days a week, and we still couldn't keep up. Kendra wanted vacations and nice restaurants and a bigger apartment. I was trying. I was picking up overtime when I could get it and skipping lunch to save $8 a day. I was also building something on the side. Since I was 19, I had been teaching myself to design and build websites, and every night after my shift, I sat at a secondhand desk in the corner of our bedroom and worked until 2 in the morning. Barbershops, a dog groomer, a local bakery that paid me in cash and a free loaf of bread on Saturdays. I charged almost nothing because I was still learning. The desk was missing a leg, and I had it propped on a stack of phone books. I drank instant coffee out of a chipped mug and answered client emails from a 5-year-old laptop with a cracked screen. Kendra hated it. She said I was wasting time, said nobody was going to pay real money for a website built by a guy who worked at a print shop. The night before she left, I showed her a contract I had just signed, a real one. A restaurant chain with 12 locations wanted me to build their entire online ordering system for $8,000. It was the biggest check I had ever been close to earning. I had printed the contract at the library on the way home and folded it into my back pocket because I didn't want to crease it. I was shaking when I pulled it out at the dinner table. I thought she was going to cry. I thought she was going to throw her arms around me. Instead, she looked at the paper for about 4 seconds and pushed it back across the table. She said $8,000 was not going to change our lives. She said I needed to grow up. The next day, she was gone. She moved in with a man named Keith who sold cars at a dealership and drove a nice truck and had a 2-bedroom condo. I found out 2 weeks later from a mutual friend. The divorce was simple because we had nothing to split. She didn't ask for anything. Her lawyer was Keith's cousin. I kept building. I finished the restaurant site. They referred me to another group with 20 locations and paid me $15,000. I quit the print shop. I rented a small office above a dry cleaner and went full-time. Within a year, I had 6 employees. Within 3 years, 40. Last year, my company brought in $14 million and I bought a house on 4 acres. I built every piece of it after she walked out the door. Kendra and Keith lasted 2 years. He got fired. They broke up. She moved in with her sister Victoria. I knew because the updates kept coming from the same mutual friend even though I never asked. Then, 8 months ago, a local business magazine put me on the cover. The article spelled out the revenue, the growth, the new office. The friend told me later that Kendra read it the day it came out. 2 weeks after that, she texted me for the first time in 6 years. She said she was proud of me and always knew I had it in me. I didn't respond. She texted again the next day. I didn't respond. 3 days later, she called and left a voicemail saying she lost her apartment and her sister couldn't let her stay. Then on a Saturday morning, she showed up. She pulled into the driveway in a car with a cracked windshield and a trash bag of clothes in the back seat. She had a suitcase in the trunk. She knocked. I opened the door. She looked at the floors behind me, at the staircase, at the rooms past my shoulder. Then she looked at me and said leaving me was the worst decision she ever made. She said Keith was a mistake. She said she had nowhere to go and asked if she could stay just until she got back on her feet. She had the suitcase ready. She was prepared to move in that day. I leaned against the doorframe and asked her if she remembered what she said the night I showed her the restaurant contract. She looked confused. I told her. I said you looked at the biggest opportunity of my life and told me $8,000 wasn't going to change our lives. I said you told me to grow up and you left the next morning for a man who could buy you dinner at a nice restaurant. I said I built everything you're looking at after you left, not before. Every email, every all-nighter, every Christmas I worked through, after. I said the version of me you wanted didn't exist back then because you killed him on your way out the door. She started crying. I told her she couldn't stay. She nodded slowly, walked to her car, and sat in the driveway for 20 minutes. Then my phone rang. Riker. He's an old friend who somehow stayed friends with both of us. He'd already heard her version. He told me she was sleeping in her car, that I had a 5-bedroom house, that I could let her crash for one night. I told him she'd shown up with a packed suitcase and a trash bag of clothes already in the back seat, that she'd come because of the magazine, that she didn't miss me. She missed what I could give her. Riker went quiet for a second. He said, but she has nothing. He said, you're the only person she has left, and that has to mean something. I said, no, it doesn't. I said her bad choices weren't my responsibility to fix, and I wasn't going to pretend they were just because she was crying in my driveway. Then he said something I couldn't shake. He said if something happened to her, that was going to be on my conscience, not his. I went to bed at 11 and stared at the ceiling for an hour. I got up, got in my car, and told myself I was just going for a drive. I wasn't. A mile from my house, there's a grocery store with a big back lot, and her car was parked under one of the lights, the seat reclined. I sat across the lot for 10 minutes, watching the light flicker above her. A shopping cart was knocked over against the curb behind her car, one wheel still spinning slow in the cold wind. Through the windshield, I could see her hand draped over the gear shift and a balled-up jacket pressed against the window as a pillow. The light above the car buzzed each time it flickered, a low electric hum I could hear faintly even from across the lot. I thought about the woman who told me $8,000 wasn't going to change our lives, and how now she was sleeping in a parking lot because she'd run out of people willing to keep her. I told myself it wasn't my job to be the next one in line. I told myself she'd find somewhere else. Then I thought about Riker's voice on the phone, the way he'd left those words sitting in my head on purpose. Then I called Riker. I said one night, guest room, gone by noon. I tapped on her window. I said it again, flat, no softness. She nodded and whispered, thank you. I walked her into the first floor guest room, pointed at the towels, said noon, and closed the door. I lay upstairs and stared at the ceiling again, knowing I had just made a mistake. I fell asleep around 2. I woke at 7 to the smell of coffee and butter and bread. I came down the stairs and stopped at the bottom step. The whole counter was covered. Scrambled eggs the way I used to like them. Toast stacked on a cutting board. Cut fruit in a bowl. Coffee already poured in one of my mugs. Kendra was standing there in one of my old t-shirts she had pulled out of a drawer somewhere, and she smiled at me like this was a Sunday morning in our old apartment. She said the least she could do was cook for me, like old times. Every alarm in my head went off. This was the play. Not the crying, not the begging. The slow, quiet slide back in. Make herself useful. Make it feel normal. I told her to get dressed and be out by noon. At noon, I stood by the front door with my arms crossed. She came down the stairs at 12 on the dot. She didn't walk toward me. She sat down on the last step, set the suitcase next to her, and said she'd called around all morning and there was nothing she could afford because every place wanted first and last month. Then she clasped her hands and asked if she could have one more week. I said no. Her face changed like a mask coming off. The softness disappeared. The sad eyes went flat. Her jaw tightened. She stood up and said, I had $14 million and couldn't let my ex-wife sleep in a spare room for 7 days. What kind of person did that make me? I said the kind of person who remembers being told to grow up while you packed your bags for a guy with a truck. She didn't have a response for that one. Her mouth opened and then closed. She never did have one because the truth was simple and she knew it. She left me for Keith because Keith had money and I didn't, and no amount of dressing it up changed that math. She grabbed her suitcase, walked past me, and pulled the door open. Then she stopped. She turned back and said Riker was right. Money had made me cold. I almost laughed. Money didn't make me cold. Getting left by the woman I loved because I wasn't rich enough made me careful. There's a difference. I locked the door and threw the whole breakfast in the trash. 2 hours later, Riker texted that Kendra was telling people I had kicked her out on the street and Victoria had called him upset. I read it 3 times. Kendra wasn't just leaving. She was building a story. The rich ex-husband who threw his struggling ex-wife into the cold. People were buying it because they didn't know what actually happened. I had to call Victoria. I had never once spoken to her without Kendra in the room. I found her contact and hit the call. She answered cold. I said I was calling because the version Kendra was telling her wasn't true and she deserved the real one. I told her everything. The suitcase, the trash bag of clothes, the one-night deal, the breakfast in my t-shirt, the stairs at noon, the 14 million speech. I didn't add anything and I didn't leave anything out. Victoria was quiet a long time. Then she said that sounded exactly like Kendra. She said Kendra had done the same thing to her, that she was supposed to stay 2 weeks and stayed 5 months, and Victoria had to change the locks to get her out. I sat down in my office chair. Victoria kept going. She said Kendra didn't just lose her apartment because she ran out of money. She lost it because she'd been fired from her job 3 months ago and never told anyone. Not Victoria, not Riker, nobody. She'd been living on credit cards and borrowed money until that ran out, and then she went to Victoria, and when Victoria couldn't take it anymore, she came to me. Victoria's voice got soft. She said she loved her sister, but Kendra didn't want help. She wanted someone to take care of her. That was what she'd wanted from Keith. She said Keith hadn't just gotten fired. Kendra had drained his bank account on store cards and rent he didn't know she'd stopped paying, and by the time he caught it, he was 3 months behind on the condo, and she was already gone. Victoria said Keith had called her once after the eviction, asking if she'd seen her sister. He'd sounded broken on the phone. She'd told him the truth, that she hadn't seen Kendra in weeks, and he'd thanked her and hung up, and she'd never heard from him again. That was what she'd wanted from Victoria. That was what she wanted from me. I thanked her, and we hung up. I sat at my desk and stared at the wall. None of it had ever been about me. It had always been about what someone else had. Keith had a truck. Victoria had a spare room. I had 14 million and a 5-bedroom house. Kendra moved toward whoever had the most until they pushed her out. I knew she wasn't going to stop. She'd keep calling Riker, keep spinning the story, keep finding new angles. I needed to shut it down so clean there was no room left to twist it. I called Riker and told him to set up a dinner. Me, him, Kendra, somewhere neutral. He sounded relieved. He thought I was finally softening. I picked a quiet booth restaurant on the east side, the kind of place where nobody pays attention to the table next to them. Kendra walked in with her hair styled and a new blouse and earrings I had never seen, dressed like she was going on a first date. She'd spent money she didn't have to look good for this. 2 weeks ago, she'd been sleeping in a parking lot, and now she was walking into a restaurant like the whole thing was already settled in her head. That told me everything I needed to know about how she saw the night. She slid into the seat across from me and reached for my hand. Her fingers were warm. I pulled mine back into my lap. I didn't do it fast. I just moved it. Riker came in a few minutes later and sat next to her like a referee. Nobody ordered food. Kendra started talking and I could tell she had practiced. She said she was immature when she left. She didn't understand what I was building. She panicked because we were broke. She said she knew she hurt me. It all sounded right. I had heard versions of it on my porch, in my house at 7 in the morning, on the stairs at noon. I let her finish. Then she put her phone on the table and said she still had every text I'd ever sent her. She scrolled to one from 2018, 3 months before she left, and turned the screen toward me. It said, I promise I'm going to take care of you. Just give me time. I'm building something real. I remembered sending it. She had been upset about the broken dishwasher, and I told her I'd wash everything by hand until I could fix it. She said the promise was still real. Didn't that count for anything? I sat there looking at my own words on her screen and felt the memory of who I was when I typed them. A 25-year-old kid at a used desk at 1 in the morning. I took a long breath. I said I meant every word of that text. I said I would have built this life with her in it. But she didn't just leave. She told me I was wasting my time. She told me to grow up. She moved in with another man the same week. That promise died the day she killed it. Her eyes filled. Riker put his head in his hands. The restaurant kept clinking plates around us like nothing was happening. I let the silence sit. Then I said I talked to Victoria. The change behind her eyes was instant, like watching a switch flip. The tears stopped. Not slowly. They just stopped. Her face went still. I said Victoria told me she was fired 3 months ago and never told anyone. I said Victoria told me she lived there 5 months, was supposed to stay 2 weeks, and Victoria had to change the locks. I said Victoria told me what she did to Keith with his bank account before the condo went under. Kendra's voice came out low and sharp. She said Victoria had no right to tell me any of that. I said she had every right because Kendra was about to do the same thing to me. Riker lifted his head and looked at her. The nervousness on his face was gone. In its place was a question he didn't want to ask. He asked it anyway, slowly. He asked if the part about Victoria changing the locks was true. Kendra didn't answer. She sat there about 5 seconds looking at the table, then she grabbed her purse and walked out. The little bell above the door jingled when it closed behind her. 3 days went quiet. No texts, no calls, no Riker at 10 at night. I slept through the night on Sunday for the first time in weeks. Tuesday evening I pulled into my driveway after a long day, and she was sitting on my porch steps. house, not crying, not pacing, just sitting with her hands folded, calm and flat. She stood up before I reached her and said she wasn't there to ask for anything. She said 5 minutes, then she was gone forever. I crossed my arms and waited. This time it was different. The rehearsed smoothness from the dinner was gone. The crying was gone. The angry guilt trip was gone. She spoke slowly, like she was pulling each word out of herself by hand. She said I was right about everything. She used Keith. She used Victoria. She came here because of the money. She saw the magazine and thought maybe she could slide back in before I figured out why. Then she said something that almost got through. She said sitting in her car in that parking lot, she realized she didn't lose me because she left. She lost me because she never actually saw me. She looked at me every day for 4 years and never once saw what I was becoming. She said that was the worst thing she had ever done. The way her voice cracked on the word becoming reminded me of the Kendra I fell in love with, the one who used to sit next to me on the couch while I sketched website layouts on notebook paper and say she didn't get what I was doing, but she liked watching me do it. That Kendra. For about 10 seconds, I almost believed her. I felt the guard I had built start to lean. I was about to open my mouth. I don't know what I was going to say. Maybe something softer than anything I had said to her in weeks. Then my phone buzzed. I almost didn't look. Something made me. It was a text from Victoria. It said, "Heads up, Kendra called me an hour ago asking for your home security code. She said you gave her permission to come pick something up. I didn't give it to her. Just wanted you to know." I read it once. I read it again. Then I looked up at Kendra standing on my porch with those honest eyes and that perfect speech. And the whole thing fell apart like a house made of paper. I held up the phone and turned the screen toward her. "I said you called Victoria an hour ago asking for my home security code. You told her I gave you permission." The calm cracked. Her mouth opened and closed twice. She said that wasn't, she'd left something inside from when she stayed over. I said you didn't leave anything. I checked the guest room after you left. It was empty. She stared at me with nothing. No tears to use. No speech to give. The act was gone. Every word she had just said about the parking lot was the setup. The security code was the real play. She said you don't understand what it's like to have nothing. I said I had nothing for years, and she was there for that part. The difference is, I didn't try to take what wasn't mine. She flinched. She tried to find some new angle and there was nothing. She walked to her car, slammed the door, and pulled out fast enough that her tires squealed against the pavement. I watched her taillights shrink around the curve at the end of the street. What I felt wasn't anger. It wasn't sadness. It was relief, complete and bone deep, like setting down a bag I had been carrying for 6 years without realizing how heavy it was. Riker called the next morning and said Kendra wanted one more meeting with both of us, that she had something to say and wanted a witness. I said fine, one last time. He said it at his apartment. He was pacing when I got there. He said she'd sounded flat on the phone and he didn't know what she was going to do. We waited. She knocked twice, soft. She walked in and sat across from me and didn't look at Riker. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a folded piece of paper, worn at the creases, and laid it on the coffee table between us. I knew what it was before I read a word. The handwriting, the hard pen. It was the note from the counter in our old apartment 6 years ago. She'd kept it through Keith's condo, through Victoria's spare room, through the back seat of a car with a cracked windshield. She sat back and said she'd read it every few months and every time it made her sick because she knew exactly who she was when she wrote it. Someone who measured people by what they could buy her. And she said she was still that person. She'd tried to pretend she wasn't, at the door, at the dinner, on the porch, but every single time she was calculating. She pushed the paper across the table and said I should keep it. She said if I ever started to feel guilty about turning her away, I should read it. That was who she really was. I picked it up and unfolded it. The same words. I can't do this anymore. I'm tired of struggling. I need someone who can actually provide. I had read those words 1,000 times in my head over the years. At the desk at 2 in the morning when I was choosing between paying the power bill and buying a new keyboard. The day I got my first real check. The day I hired my first employee. The day I signed the papers on the house. They had followed me through every milestone like a shadow I couldn't outrun. But holding the actual paper, the weight was lighter than I expected. Not the paper itself. The ache. The thing I had been carrying for 6 years that I thought was permanent. It was lighter now. I folded it along the old creases and put it in my jacket. I looked at her and said I didn't hate her. I said I'd spent a long time being angry, but I wasn't angry anymore. I said her leaving was the best thing that ever happened to me. Not because it made me successful, because it showed me what I was willing to build when nobody believed in me. And I wouldn't trade that for anything, not even for getting those 4 years back. Tears ran down her face. She didn't wipe them. She said one word. I know. She stood and looked at Riker and said, take care of him. He's the real thing. I just couldn't see it. Riker nodded once. She walked to the door, put her hand on the knob, and turned back one last time. She said, for what it's worth, the $8,000 did change your life. I was just too stupid to see how. Then she stepped through and closed the door behind her. I drove home with the windows down. The air smelled like cut grass. I pulled into the driveway, walked to the front door, and stepped inside without turning on the lights. The hum of the fridge, the tick of a clock somewhere down the hall. The house felt completely, entirely mine.